Good evening.
Evening. How are you?
I am well, and yourself?
Really well. Tonight, we have decided to talk about a really interesting topic, I think. Fangs, facts, and fiction. So, vampire myths and misconceptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And before we dive in, we should define, I guess, what we mean by a vampire, which, interestingly enough, the definition is one of those really big sticking points throughout the community. There's a lot of disagreement about what it means to be a vampire, what you have to do, how you have to relate to the world to qualify. Um, so I just want to put that disclaimer right front and center before we even dive in, that we're going to try to be pretty clear when we mean the folkloric vampire, the vampire as they appear in modern media and fiction. And if we're speaking about actual specific traditions or cultural practices, we'll try to keep that very precise as well. We'll cite our sources, in other words. Um, and then, of course, there is the modern day vampire community that includes a lot of folks that we'll be uh, speaking on extensively when we get to the feeding section, who have a fundamental need of some kind that is so significant as to merit the assumption of a new identity. Um, so we'll talk a lot more about that in detail as we get to the specific misconceptions that we're hoping to explore and maybe resolve with some more evidence-based uh, information. Uh, get us started, Raven. Why don't you tell us some common misconceptions about things we think we know about vampires, but maybe we don't?
Well, there's a commonality that people think that every vampire needs to drink blood.
Mm,
There's also the common thought process that, um, well, there's some weird ones like vampires can't go into churches. Every vampire needs a donor. Vampirism is always inherited. Um,
mm.
those are some of the common misconceptions and myths that I have heard. What about you?
Oh, sure. Well, I have heard a lot of similar stuff. I mean, obviously, some of that is based on folklore and fiction. Like, I don't like going into a lot of churches unless I feel especially welcome there. But a lot of specific types of churches hold traumatic memories for me, and I just don't feel especially welcome in them. But I don't burst into flames or get struck by lightning or anything like in the movies. Um, but I think we can maybe gain some sort of insight into the relationship with traditional religion that the archetypical vampire represents for some members of the community. There, when I was going through a lot in my early days in adolescence, high school to age, it did feel a little bit like a part of me was bursting into flames every time I had to go to church. It felt like I was being dragged into hell a
Hmm.
little bit every time. And I did relate to the fictional vampire a lot at that time, in part because of that intense imagery that did resonate with the incredibly dramatic feelings I was having as a teenager. Um, So, I will say even that more extreme, obviously fictional aspect of the community has some basis in truth, I think, or we've made it true with our use of it in our belief systems in part. I'm going to be very romantic throughout all of this, by the way. I apologize in advance. Now, as far as some of the other specific myths that you mentioned, though, about inheritance, bloodlines, the origins of vampirism, sometimes those relate to specific traditions within the community. And what it means to them to be a vampire may very well specifically require that you have a certain lineage that you can demonstrate, or specific uh, skills or past life memories that connect you to them in a way that you could demonstrate through their initiatory system. Um, Now, I'm not a part of a system that does it quite like that. Uh, and so it's not necessary to be a part of the vampire community to have um, those specific qualifications where you can say that your parents also identified as community members, or that you have a specific reaction to silver or garlic or sunlight. But maybe you do. Um, it's I think the community is a spectrum, and who considers others a part of it varies from one group to another. I am pretty inclusive personally, and I don't even require you to identify as a vampire at all to consider you kin and of important spiritual relations. Um, but that is not universally true throughout the community. Some of us are very particular. So I think that can be a part of where that misconception comes from, is that it's not always a misconception. Some people say that and they mean it 100%. That is what it
Hmm.
requires for them to be a vampire. It's just that that's not universally true. Um, Sorry, I hope that contributed.
It does. I mean, from my experiences, my personal experiences as a vampire, I don't burst into flames when I go into a church, but I really don't like it. I really don't care for them. That does have to do with trauma and religious systems that I was brought up in. Um, I don't particularly have a deep caring for sunlight, but I can be in the sun. Um, there are some people in the community that actually do have health things that prevent them from really being out in the sunlight. But also, I think that within the community, I would agree, you're going to find a really wide spectrum of things that, um, different kinds of vampires and how they work with things, but it's based on their own personal experiences. It's not necessarily because we all have the same exact reactions to different things. It's experience, I would think, and health too. Um, other ones that have come up, garlic crosses holy water and religious objects. Now I
Mhm.
know I have a friend who is very, 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 very like she will react if she sees a cross.
Mm,
But again, it's religious trauma. It's not because of who she is. Um, Garlic, I think, is a personal preference. I
I
mean,
quite like it.
yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
when it comes to how when it comes to, let me see, how do I word this? When it comes to people outside of the community, what do you think really primarily affects them to think that we're affected in these individual ways as a group?
I think that there's not really a whole lot of grounded representation out there. There's been a couple of instances in my lifetime of mainstream media having actual community members speaking about their experiences in the community. Like, well, I won't name names, but until we invite people on the show to speak for themselves. But there've been literally a handful, maybe 5 times, that there were decent representations, and were a bit obscure. Um, in the internet age, I think that that is changing. If you are looking for it, you can find it a lot easier now because there are, thankfully, some decent voices out there that are speaking honestly about what it means to be a member of the community in a way that doesn't overly romanticize or demonize the lived reality. Um, but if you haven't been actively seeking that out, so you're not a community member, you don't have any reason to seek out a whole lot of detailed information from these firsthand sources, then what you've got is the fiction that's out there. Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of these, the ability that we can turn into bats, wolves, or mist, for example, comes directly from Dracula, which has
Hmm.
been, of course, his story's been told many, many times over and over again in the media, including recently. Sometimes remarkably well. Uh, Notably, he could only do those things during the nighttime. That was why the daytime was so significant to the story, was that his magic seemed to be nocturnal in nature. Um, and I think we can relate to that as well metaphorically. But we are sort of drawing parallels because we're given a certain source material. People are
Hmm.
looking for some sort of connection to the reference points that they have, which are whatever's been in the media recently, whatever they saw in that movie that time. Is and then we're trying to explain how that relates in some way, even if it doesn't really. But I think there are some useful metaphors, and some folks in the community absolutely also came to the community initially because something in the depiction of the vampire in fiction seemed like breadcrumbs, like it was something they should follow that might lead them to something meaningful. They had to use some sort of search term when they were looking for the real community online, and real vampires, more often than not, is what leads people to the real vampire community. But even for early community members or new community members, it is the fictional or folkloric vampire, at least in part. I think if we're honest, that has played some role in our awakening. We didn't hear about the Temple of the Vampire's 5 Bibles before we heard about Dracula. That's just not the world we live in. Um, I think I want to be very fair to the fictional vampire, if that makes sense. It holds a very special place in my heart, uh, as does role playing, by the way. I don't know. I think we have that coming up in the outline, but it's come up now naturally. I just want to say
Hmm.
for the record that it gets a bad rap because people want to differentiate. And I understand there's definitely a big difference between folks who are just role playing and folks who have some sort of intrinsic need that causes them to identify and be active in the community in specific ways. That said, a lot of folks in the community found each other at these role playing events, uh, learning how to communicate and embody certain. persona and communicate with confidence as a vampire is something all newly awakened folks have to do, whether they're just role players or they are entering the online space for the first time and figuring out the rules of engagement in the very real online vampire community space. Uh, there's a lot of overlap skill wise and practically speaking and historically speaking. Uh, and I find a lot of the intentional distancing from that ahistorical. But that was my soapbox for the evening. My apologies. I'll hand you back
Well,
the mic.
I would have to agree with that though. So I started learning about vampires in libraries. I am a huge book reader. I love reading books. And I was brought up in a very religious construct to where to explore anything outside of the religious faith that I was in was madness. But I started researching things and found Anne Rice's books.
Oh,
And I found those two, the stories to reach into a part of me that, in some essences, called out. And so it made me more curious and it made me want to explore. When I was 16, was it 16? Yeah, I think I was 16. Uh, a friend of mine and I met someone who was in charge of live RPG for Vampires of the Masquerade. And we got invited to get involved with the Vampires of the Masquerade. And I started going to these because I was like, okay, there's something about this. Yes, there's the acting aspects of it. Yes, there's the theatrical sides of it. But then when you look at the connections, at least for me, on a metaphysical level, as well as on a spiritual level, as well as what I was feeling within my own body, I was like, wait a minute, some of this actually resonates. So role playing can be a real helper for people in the community. Also, I had my first interactions with people that weren't vampires, that are still um, in that community, which is a different dynamic. It obviously is a different dynamic, but it helped me to start wanting to dig deeper and go, okay, there's so much more out there. And the next thing you know, I was like flooding through different kinds of books and things. And then I started connecting with the vampire community. And so those things are substantially helpful to have, at least to start finding more of those kinds of people, because there are people that are vampires that actually like to play vampires. So it
absolutely.
works.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. Um, where do we want to go from here?
I know you mentioned one of the misconceptions about what it means to be a vampire that I wanted to circle back to is the assumption that it's necessary to drink blood. Because that
Right.
is, of course, one of the defining characteristics of the fictional vampire in films. Almost always, they're nipping at people's necks or draining their bodily fluids one way or another in a very literal sense. Um, Now, in the vampire community today, there absolutely are plenty of folks who feed primarily that way, or that's the only method of feeding that is feasible for them. But it's not at all universal. Um, Now, there are folks who, and this has been the case since way, way back, that insist that the only legitimate form of vampirism at least includes sanguine feeding. Uh, And then there's others that insist that this disqualifies you from legitimate vampirism just as much. And I think both of those uh, perspectives is needlessly alienating of important and obvious members of the larger vampire community. I don't think it's necessary. Look, I will say, as someone who has um, fed on blood before, but doesn't have to, I understand the appeal, for sure. There is a difference, and I have zero doubt that there are folks who cannot feed any other way, that what they need is uniquely conveyed through blood feeding. And I think it's important for us to continue to make space for them in the community and to recognize that they've always been an important present part of the community, even during times when we were squeamish to make or keep space for them out of fear of legal um, persecution, basically, because it is an important medical, cultural, and/or religious practice in common use in the community. Um, Gosh, I said I had gotten on my soapbox for the evening, and then I found another one. My apologies. I have a lot of
Well,
big
but at
opinions.
this at the same time, I think what most people that are not in the community do not understand is that there is consent generally, hopefully, because this is what we advocate for, is consent and communication and um, the willingness to actually be open to those kinds of feeding uh, options. From my understanding, it, it's usually agreed upon.
Oh my,
So,
yeah, yes. Whether, regardless of the particular nature of the feeding, the exchange between the vampire and the person that they are exchanging with, they're communing with. Uh, Consent is absolutely essential every single time.
right,
Um, and now that can be tough to find a donor that is comfortable with giving of themselves in that sense on a regular basis. It makes that kind of partnership especially precious and one that largely, I think, defines the community. Um, what differentiates the actual vampire community and the fictional vampire community uh, most obviously, I think, in my experience, is that in real life, vampires are easily spotted by our relationships with whoever or whatever is keeping us alive. We need some sort of connection to a person or people in order to keep going, in order to find the energy necessary to live, vital energy. Um, and so you don't see isolated roving vampires just enthralling someone outside a nightclub and taking just enough to survive one more night to whatever is going on in the modern movies. You find people that have somehow navigated some very, very intimate, vulnerable conversations with some trusted partners and found a way to negotiate very intimate exchanges on a regular basis that are sufficient to mutually benefit everyone involved. Um, we can't go around non consensually drawing people's blood or draining them of their life. You, I mean, aside from the obvious ethical issues with that, you know, you shouldn't want to do that.
yeah,
You would. You would get a really poor reputation instantly. No one would invite you to their parties, or you would get kicked out of clubs pretty quickly. You can't just do
Legal
that with well,
issues.
yeah, yeah, you can't get away with that for very long. You've got to grow up and learn how to forge symbiotic relationships that people want to continue with you. People should want to be engaging with you in a way that builds you up and gives you the strength to keep going. Um, that's how you know you're living right. But that's not to say that you aren't living right if you don't have a donor. Sometimes we just live in isolated places. Uh, but that is one of the big differences, I would say, in the fictional and the real vampire is that we are striving for a deeply uplifting, mutually beneficial, obviously consensual relationship with someone, a donor or a partner or a black swan, they're often referred to in the community. Um, but a precious, precious partner that is the source of life for us, often a group of partners if our needs are greater. Um, but I digress yet again. Uh, um, I think the next thing that I wanted to us to explore together was some of the actual traditions in the community, because we have there are not only myths and misconceptions about the community, but there's plenty within the community as well. Uh, are you familiar with um, gosh, any inner community biases or myths or common beliefs that you think might be questionable at best?
Can you repeat the question, please? It was a little soft. I couldn't hear you.
No worries. I asked, can you think of any common or widespread beliefs within the community that you think might be a little bit questionable, a little myths, a little bit of myth or misconception within the community?
Mm, you know, um, it's really hard to tack down one specific thing because there are many thought processes in what people in the community have in regards to that. Um, Let me think about that for a minute a little bit more. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh gosh, sure. Well, I think that there uh, there's a distinct lack of um, well-cited, well-grounded sources of historical material about the community. I've seen some good efforts recently to fill that gap, but
Mhm.
for most of us, for a long time now, and still to some extent today, if you don't have a small fortune to buy a bunch of books that are now long out of print, you just aren't going to have any documentation with which to determine what happened in the past in the early community. You'll have to piece together the best narrative you can from very biased accounts on Facebook and Discord servers. Um, and you might happen to get somebody who has a pretty balanced perspective, but you're probably going to get a lot of very, very angry, slanted perspectives.
True.
Um, and what people are left with uh, is really quite random, which loud, angry voice convinced them it was the truth first, may be what they are stuck with having a bias about for, you know, a long, long time in their community before they get a more diverse set of perspectives. some folks never really get a lot of different points of view in the community, and are left with some thinking that some very specific perspectives are almost universal. If they've never talked to anybody outside of their specific coven, um, they might have no idea just how many different belief systems there are out there. Some vampires think that all other vampires are Satanists or Luciferians, or they must work with Hecate, or um, they must be
That is true.
atheists. Um, and the truth is, I've known many people who are definitely, undisputably vampires who work with all of those deities and many others. But quite a few of us are chaos magicians, and what deities, if any, that we're working with at a given week might shift.
Hmm.
Um, that would I would say is one pattern of misconception that I see in the community is that a lot of folks, even if they've been in the community, active in the community for a long time, are sometimes really surprised by the breadth of diversity of belief and practice and tradition in the community. I think it's fascinating and beautiful, and inspires me to find the common ground that draws all of us to a similar identity label. Um, but a lot of other folks prefer to use it as an excuse to fight and find precise differences.
I will say that I have seen a lot of differences of opinion on the historical factors behind the community in certain areas. And what I'm finding is that I am, because this was something like even for me in the beginning, I was told certain things and then corrected by others. And then I actually had to sit down and be like, okay, what is the actual history behind uh, specifics? And there's information that was provided to me that actually started to make sense a little bit more so. And I was like, okay, do I know for sure that all of the history is completely on point? Absolutely not, because so many people have different, or so many different people within the community, so many different vampires within the community have different perspectives. But I think that there is a working to actually get that a little bit more organized, which is good. Um, Religiously speaking, I have met Christian vampires. I know that sounds like totally contradictory to Christianity, but I have met them and I have had deep discussions with a couple of them. And religion, vampires can be in any religion or any walk of faith.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Same. I've known, I don't think I've ever known an evangelical vampire personally, but I've known a couple of Catholic vampires who have said that nothing about the catechism specifically is violated or forbids their identity or practice within the community. They find no contradictions at all. And I don't
Mhm.
know much at all about Catholicism. I just take their word for it.
Well, it's interesting because Catholicism actually has a lot of ritual and a lot of other aspects to it that make me feel like it would make sense in some aspects that vampires would be in the Catholic community as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. The theatricality does appeal. It makes sense. Um, oh, here's an interesting common association that people have with vampires that I think comes up a lot in common media depictions as well as the actual community. I think has some issues or some well-earned reputations, I think, for associating vampirism with sexuality I wanted to touch on. Now, obviously, speaking of community history, there is a lot of overlap between early community activity and organizing and BDSM culture. It's talked about, for example, in V.M. Johnson's Dampier, which came out in the mid 90s, I want to say. It's a pretty early pre-Sanguinarium, right around the same time, 1996. Um, and several community members, including some we'll be having on the show soon, will talk about how their experience of community building in the BDSM community was a lot, uh, guided a lot of the early contributions that they made to the vampire community. Uh, some folks engage in the scenes in fetish clubs in a way that is obvious energy work that can be quite telling to someone else who engages in a similar practice. Someone might have a blood fetish that another vampire present at the scene might recognize as maybe a little bit more than just a fetish. Um, So there is a very legitimate historical connection and valuable ongoing bridge between the communities of um, ethical, consensual sex work and fetish exploration and the vampire and general nightkind community. That said, I do want to speak on something that I've seen come up where a lot of folks feel like their sexuality and the way that they express it is compulsory at vampire events, if especially for women that are going to these balls. They feel like some of these events. This is not true of every event, and we don't tend to host folks who are promoting events who are like overtly sexualizing their guests. But I have seen events that create an atmosphere that makes the women in attendance feel like they aren't going to fit in, or they aren't going to be welcome, or they aren't going to be valued if they aren't dressed in a certain way that is hypersexualized. Um, Now, I do love that our events have a long history of being welcoming and affirming and safe for women who do want to express themselves with as much or as little uh, clothing as they want. Um, but I think it's important that we make sure that our atmospheres don't imply that that's the only safe way to be an active or present part of the community. Um, and I think that's, I know that some events really tend to be to not make much space for the parts of the community that, gosh, I don't want to downplay the importance of the balls and the club events, but it's really, really important to our community that we also have quiet spaces where we can hear our elders speak. We can't really do that if you have to be wearing a mini skirt to get in, and there's blasting EDM music everywhere that we meet. We need a lot more spaces, I think, where we can hear each other and hear ourselves think and not feel like we have a 2 drink minimum that's going to dull our senses
Right.
and alienate our elders. But I'm getting on yet another soapbox. My goodness. I think there's something in the water I've been hydrating with. My apologies.
Well, I think also um, there are a lot of elders that are trying to create safer spaces for women to come into as well. because and not just in regards to how they dress, but people who have disabilities, vampires who have disabilities, vampires who have specific needs, they're being more accommodating for those, and vampires who don't drink alcohol. And I think there are elders that are creating safe spaces to where people can, people that are finding out that they're vampires, can learn and actually learn from each other and go in really, really deep on a soul level to really figure the whole energy out, for themselves. And so I just think that while you may feel you're on a soapbox about this, these are things that are important to our community. Um, they help provide answers to people who are newer vampires who are truly seeking and trying to figure things out, or they've been vampires for a while, but they don't understand why they feel the way that they feel or why they do certain things that they do. Um, so important, very important.
Well, here's a common misconception that I hear inside and outside the community. And I'll talk a little bit about why I think that is. But it's a cult, the whole thing. The whole community is one big cult, and or one big network of multiple cults. And everyone who believes they're a vampire or participates in the community is brainwashed or crazy or recruiting or some such thing. Big conspiracy. Um, I think we've all heard that from concerned family members who found the wrong Facebook. We've seen it in various YouTube videos. Everybody loves a scandalous conspiracy theory these days, especially about something as glamorous and mysterious as real vampires. Oh my gosh, the headlines write themselves. Now, that said, I have known several actual vampire cults for sure, if they have happened. So maybe to some extent we've earned that reputation. I think we had it before we started, and people who wanted to start cults just utilized the allure of the community that was starting to bud um, in some cases. But that's what cult leaders do. People who are just trying to start a cult without actually doing the real work of making real change in some way. They just want followers without necessarily doing something worth following. They'll just find something that's already happening and find some way to claim ownership over it. Um, I think we can all think of some examples in the community, if we've been in the community for very long, of folks who tried to lay some claim over the entire community somehow.
Hmm.
The community is, of course, made up of quite a few people, and the leaders of the community even is a solid group of people who have given quite extensively of themselves. No one person could or should even want to take credit for the whole big mess. It took a lot of us to make it happen and to make it this messy. Um, so as far as it being a cult, it's not. A lot of us aren't even religious and are certainly quick to jump in and out of the community. Will rage quit for a few months and then come back to some specific Facebook group. I think all of us have had experiences like that, perhaps, where it's like, you know what, for a month, I'm just not even a vampire anymore. I'm just going to do my best to coast and see how it goes. For a lot of us, the basic intrinsic needs that we have drag us back. Uh, but cults don't tend to be quite that easy to hop in and out of, in my experience. Not to oversimplify the dangers of cults, and again, there are folks who will try to ensnare you into um, uh, manipulative, coercive structures of control within the community, and you have to be mindful. We will be working on and exploring some of the importance and red flags relating to that in depth in a panel on this very show
Mhm.
in the near future. More information coming soon. Um, but all of it, absolutely not. We'd have no cohesive belief system. We just don't qualify in so many ways uh, to be a cult. We have no control over anyone. We aren't very good at convincing other people even that we aren't delusional, much less that they should agree with our our whatever our delusions are. Um, but that's one that I have heard. Have you ever been accused of being in a cult because of your relationship with the community?
Yes, and I just kind of roll my eyes at it and go, okay, well, what research have you done that has shown any kind of founding of that? Where are your resources? And usually the resources are not them actually doing the research or connecting with actual vampires in the vampire community. The people that they are connecting with are people that are not authentic vampires. Or they're misguided, extremely misguided. So, I mean, also another weird misconception that people have brought up to me is that they think that vampires don't need connection to others.
Right.
And that to me is delusional. That's just my own personal thoughts on it. We
I
do need
wish
connection to others.
I wish I didn't need as much connection to others sometimes, because I'm a real homebody. I don't like to go out, but I need connections to others deeply. I am of a philosophical frame of mind that we all do, really, right? No man is an island and whatnot. But vampires in particular are defined in large part by our need to be connected intimately with other people. Like I have tried in during quarantine in particular, for example, comes to mind in a recent extreme example. I think a lot of us can relate to. I had to have no direct, tangible connection to anyone. Um, and it was torture. It was really, really hard. I was not doing great during that time. It took me some time to really recover. Uh, we definitely do need connection to other people. I mean, I can only really speak for myself and everyone I've ever spoken to on the subject, but
Right.
I've never known somebody to be doing okay if they're community members when they were isolated from everyone else. Um, Plenty of us identify as, oh, I forget the word now, but we prefer our space and like to spend quality time alone. That's how we recharge. But we need that frequent connection in one form or another, even if it's just with one trusted person. Um, it's really, really important to us. Sorry, I talked a lot again. You actually brought this up. What were you going to say about it?
You are making very valid points. And connection is important I mean, it's how we function. At least, you know, at least that's my own personal experience with it. Another one is that vampires don't have emotions. Now, that's ridiculous. Everybody has emotions.
I think um, right. That is obviously, I definitely agree with you. I have emotions, like at least three different emotions almost every day. Um, they definitely are a common occurrence, even amongst vampires. I think that a lot of this comes from, and honestly, it's strange. Even the fictional vampires are so dramatic. They're obviously having lots of emotions, deep rage or desire or lust or some. I mean, those are emotions. It's just
Hmm.
poppycock. It's very strange. But I think some of it comes from misreading the the typical affectations of people who are neurodivergent. I've been told many times that my eye contact is weird, that the interests that I have and the way that I communicate is atypical, at least. It can come off as overly academic or cold, when I mean to be precise because I care so much about getting it right. Um, and that is not a vampire specific thing, it is a neurodivergent thing. But I think, and I know from personal experience, quite a few members of the community certainly are neurodivergent. I won't say all of us are by any means, but there may be, I mean, you're dealing with a solid percentage of the community literally sees things differently. Our relationship to reality is different. We have sensations of energy that are hard to describe in neurotypical terms, yet they are fundamental to us. We describe them as woven into our nervous relationship with reality. That qualifies us to identify as neurodivergent if we were so inclined. Also, anecdotally, I will say that quite a number of us are on the autism ADHD spectrum as well. Um, the way that we relate to um, others is atypical in a way that's fundamental and can and often is read as emotionless or cold and detached. But it's just different expressions, different patterns of expression than are the norm or the ones that we see modeled for us in most movies. Get to know more people who are on the spectrum, folks, and then we won't come off as emotionless. You'll understand the patterns of communication that clearly articulate our very deep, sometimes over the top and melodramatic emotions. Um, but that's just my thought about where that misconception might come from. I think it's because people say the same thing about folks on the spectrum quite frequently. Um, they never see the meltdown coming.
I mean, I agree with that. I do agree with that. Um, so perhaps consider if you are not part of the vampire community, or even if you are, that um, some of the myths that are out there are not necessarily true. And some of them have similarities to things that we go through, but they're not exact due to those specific reasons of those myths being created, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of community myths, I think one of the misconceptions that I see come up within the community a lot has to do with how old some of our traditions are. I think a lot of folks find it validating or legitimizing to connect part or all of their tradition to some practice that is older, that somehow the older it is, the more ancient it is, the more legitimate it becomes to them. And so we do see lots of, well, I won't see lots, but several notable organizations in the community will claim that their practices date back in some way or another to ancient times. Um, Now, I do want to make put a little asterisk on that and say that there are some folks who have, as a core part of their religious or fraternal structure, past life memories that indeed go back to various other times, including perhaps in some cases ancient times. And but there are other um, organizations or groups that are just just piecing themselves together, inventing a new structure and a new system that are trying to somehow manufacture a sense of antiquity. And I think we've all seen some cases where folks will claim that their thing, whatever it is, dates back decades or millennia further back than they have any reasonable grounds to claim. And I think that's an unnecessary mistake, which is why I bring it up. A lot of this community is very, very young and new. People who are alive today helped to build it. We can still learn how they did that within one lifetime. There are living elders who built something that is so precious to us that it feels like it transcends all lifetimes and time itself. It is
Mm.
of ancient significance to us, and yet it was very truly built within just one lifetime because these folks are still alive, many of them. I want us not to forget that and think that the only way we can hear the founding elders that built what we treasure is to commune with the dead. We should be communing with the dead who have wisdom to offer us, and we should be communing with the living who have wisdom to offer us, of whom we still have, blessedly, an abundance of elders. I think it is important to remember that much of the community is very young, is living, and we should listen to and elevate the voices of those who are still building or have built, who have passed through that flaming trial and have learned how to make something actually exist in this trying, trying world. Um, uh, so that's one myth I would love to just bust right now, is that not every legitimate or important part of this community is ancient in origins. You can build something today that's meaningful if you do it informed by the wisdom of living elders. For folks out there who are looking for some encouragement today, that's what I would say. One
which
more
means
soapbox for
spend
the night.
time which means spend time with the living elders to actually learn what they have to share, because that's how we evolve.
Yes, that's how it
The
becomes a tradition. Yeah,
Yeah, the ancient history is important, but the knowledge that's brought forward in the current, in the moment, also matters.
mm,
And there are a lot of really good elders out there that have a lot of information to give to those that are actually really seeking answers.
absolutely. We've had a few of them on the show, and we have several more planned. Uh,
Hmm.
we've been we've been really, really lucky here to be graced with a great deal of community wisdom. Um, but that's just proof, y'all, out there listening. We have uh, some real treasure troves of wisdom that are eagerly awaiting some open ears for those who are seeking. The information is still here. You don't need to master necromancy just yet in order to commune with our elders. You can just call them on the phone once they invite you to do so. Just be respectful. Well, it looks like we are hitting that hour mark.
We
Um,
are.
did you have some final thoughts and wisdom to share with us tonight?
My final thoughts are: do your research, reach out to people that are actually in the community. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Um, and maybe really look at the different myths that are out there and ask more questions about them. And with that being said, our next show is Monday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, you don't have to be a part of a specific. Yes, that's correct. Um,
Yeah.
don't be afraid.
For oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to point out what Reverend Tempestus has pointed
Mhm,
out here in the chat. I think is important. That's another misconception that a lot of folks have is that
mhm,
you're somehow not legitimate or not a real part of the community, or you don't have any value if you aren't affiliated with some existing organization or coven or house or any such thing.
right.
That is obviously not true. The community was founded by folks out of nothing, people who had no tradition, piecing together many traditions and influences to create something that was uniquely theirs for to build a better future for a family that they could foresee. Um, the founders of this community were by definition Ronin. Uh, they didn't have houses, so they made them. There is absolutely no shame in not having a formal affiliation with an organization. That might just mean you're destined to found the next great house yourself. Or maybe your contribution to the community doesn't require any such mooring and might, in fact, demand the absence of such limitation.
Mhm.
Some of the greatest contributors to the community were able to voice their important perspectives because they weren't tied down to too many formalities. They were free to speak their mind, which might have been made them importantly irritating. We wouldn't have history without some real irritating folks. Don't be afraid to be an outsider or to be irritating. That, I would say, is a proud part of the vampire tradition. To be an irritating outsider, a real weirdo that rubs people the wrong way.
But it makes them think. That's the
It
important
does,
part.
absolutely.
With that being said, Gwen, do you want to join us?
Hey guys, I was
Hi.
listening to the whole thing because I had questions and you answered pretty much all of them. So I was like, oh, they did really good. Yeah. And I think these, I don't know, the movies make it so they can't go into church or they this, that, and
Mm,
the other. And I was like, good, you addressed those. So that's cool. That's very cool. So good show. Good show.
thank you.
Do we know who we have next week? Or are we ready to say who we have next week?
We're going to have that be an announcement
Okay.
that is a little bit of a surprise later. So,
Okay, that's
yeah.
fine. That's fine. All
So,
right, guys, you did great. I'm gonna get out of here, but just go ahead and sign out, and I'll take you out of here.
All right.
All right.
thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who tuned in and who contributed. Reverend Tempestus, I saw specifically right there at the end. I'm sure I'm forgetting some folks who chimed in along the way. But thank you all for being here, for sharing your thoughts, and for tuning in next week, Monday, 9:30 Eastern Time. Raven?
And we will see you all next week. I'm excited to uh, bring new things. We are coming up with some amazing things that will be announced soon. So
Mm,
that being said, I can talk. Have a great night, everyone.